Okay, let's settle in. Good evening, everyone. Whew. I'm in Springfield, Massachusetts. Part of my origin, part of my journey, part of my epic tale. And I'm live and alive here in Springfield, Mass. in Western Mass. I'm at my grandparents' house, Rabbi David Edelman, in blessed memory, and my very much vibrant grandmother, Lillian. And we're happy to be here. I'm here with my wife and children. We just celebrated an amazing wedding this weekend of Sandra and Ari. Are we here? We're here? Okay. And so we're super pumped to be able to spend a couple of days with my grandmother. Right behind me is an old photo of my grandfather, Rabbi David Edelman. And here is some of his many grandchildren. Tonight's class is titled, what did I title this class, right? Tonight's class is all about being a good person. It's just not enough these days. We all want to be a good person. We all want to focus on doing the right thing. We very much want to be considered a good person in our own eyes, let alone our friends and coworkers, etc., and family. So why isn't good person enough? Well, I was thinking about this a lot recently for two reasons. Reason number one is because I think out of all the questions people ask me in the Bay Area, the number one question that very much stands out is, why be Jewish if Judaism is just about doing the right thing? Then why not just do the right thing? Be a good person. Don't do unto others what you don't want done on yourself. It's a wonderful cardinal rule. So be a good person. Let's focus on that. Why all the trimmings of Judaism? After all, being a good person is what it's all about. So I get that question all the time, and I take that question very serious. I think that question is today's day and age's, why do bad things happen to good people? That was like our parents' great big philosophical question. Why do bad things happen to good people? And that we'll deal with at another time. But our generation's question, our young adult question these days is, why be Jewish if it's all about being a good person? So therefore the title, being a good person, is just not good enough these days. The second reason why I've been thinking about this question, besides that it's asked me a lot, is the other week I was teaching a class on Isaiah, on the great prophet Isaiah, to a bunch of friends in San Francisco. We have a Friday morning class of a group of seniors that are maybe some of the unsung personalities and heroes of the Bay Area Jewish scene. Wonderful group. Anybody who's up at 8 a.m. on Friday and wants to join me for this group, you're welcome to join. They on occasion will pop into some of our events. And when I spoke about the idea of being a good person, you could imagine they were very excited to discuss the definition and what being a good person represents. What does it mean? How does it function, etc. But the thing I kept getting back to with them was that more than just defining what being a good person is, let's say there's no great definition to being a good person. Let's say being a good person is ultimately subjective, and it's you trying to be a little better than just being in it for yourself. Let's go very basic. But at the end of the day, this question is actually one of the oldest Jewish questions. When you go back all the way to the great prophets, First Temple era, an era that's very distant from us, not just because of time-wise, hey, how far is it really in the whole dinosaur scheme of things? But in the First Temple era, the people very much battled with how to bring Judaism, godliness, divinity into their existence. And a big issue that the prophets had with the people at the time wasn't religious-based. It was what we call sincerity and superficiality-based complaints. The prophets wanted the people to not just go through the motions of Jewish thought and idea, but actually have it get inside of them and really tug at them. In other words, don't just do good things, be a good person. And in our generation, it's flipped, where we know being a good person is central, but what about the things attached to that? What about the superficial, quote, act of kindness? That has unfortunately fallen a little bit by the wayside. So I wanted to talk a little bit about that tonight. And I thought, what better place to talk about it than in my grandfather's home here in Springfield, Mass. My grandfather is somebody who I think would have been a good person whether he was a rabbi or not. He was born a good person. And if he would have never gone out and been a rabbi and spent 70 years on the job, he still would have been a good person. That's who he was. So I think it makes a lot of sense to think about him and discuss him when we talk about if it's all about being a good person. He would have been a good person. His drive was to be good. But there was a little difference in who he was that inspires me and that I would like to share with you tonight. But in order for me to share it, I would like to also bring up another great character in Jewish history, Moses. In this week's scheduled Jewish learning database, we talk about the birth of Moses. And obviously when we talk about the birth of Moses, we're not just talking about a dude, we're talking about somebody who was responsible for bringing the message of the patriarchs, the Abraham message of monotheism and the way it affects the whole world, polytheism and paganism, the dominant way of living at the time. And he effectively changed the world, Moses. But in the story of Moses' birth is one of the most fascinating messages of all. You know, sometimes in birth itself is all the message you need in this world. There's a line I read, inspired by Hasidic philosophy, jotted down by Rabbi Simon Jacobson in the book Towards a Meaningful Life, where he writes, being born means you matter. Well, that also means that it's not just in the hypothetical that you matter. Being born also means that you're on a mission. There's something that you can accomplish just by being born. So Moshe is born, and at the time it's a very difficult circumstance to handle. Moshe is, hey, before we talk about patriarch, matriarch, I want to introduce you to my matriarch over here, my Bubby. This is Bubby Edelman. Say hello to everybody.
Hi, everybody.
Good to see you.
And thank you so much for letting me have my grandson for the whole Shabbos. It's one of the best Shabbosim I ever had.
Here.
Mwah.
There you go.
Okay. Keep up the good work.
Thank you, Bubby.
Okay, here.
So, Yiddish Baba, she knows what's up. So, not bad, right? So, yeah. So Moshe is born, but the time that Moshe was born in the land of Egypt is a crazy time, a real tumult time for the Jewish people. See, it started off nice and easy. The Jewish people moved down in a time of famine. The hero of the famine, saving all the lands from starvation, was one of their own, Joseph, who rises to be the viceroy of Egypt. And Joseph is quite the dude himself and sets up an incredible infrastructure. But once he passes away and the generation passes on and the new generation begins, it's already complicated for the Jewish people. They struggle to fit in Egypt and eventually become a nation of slaves and probably a hierarchy of slavery and a land dominated by dictatorship and down. And Moshe is born under the backdrop of the Jewish people being in a Holocaust-like oppression. The Torah calls it the time when they were throwing the babies into the Nile. The stargazers of Pharaoh, goes the historical narrative, saw that somebody would be born, a boy would be born from the Jewish people. This is the first of these great tales where somebody would be born and ruin everything in this lovely land of pagan dictatorship. And they decide that the best thing to do would be to throw all the boys into the Nile. And a great moment happens. The moment was that the Jewish people were in good condition, maybe simply because they were slaves and were all in good shape, or simply because they had divine blessing. Any narrative you choose, they were in good shape. All right? So The Jewish people are in good shape and they're all having babies right on time and they're really coming to their homes. They're waiting. They're marking houses at 9 months and coming in there and trying to take out the babies. And Moshe miraculously is born at 7 months. Again, either it's divine or it's simply put that Moses' mom isn't working in the same manner, but she has her baby at 7 months old. So Moshe is born premature. The great Moses is a preemie. And born at this moment, there's something very interesting that comes up right away. And that is, what was Moshe's name? Think about it. If Moshe's born early, that's why he's not immediately thrown into the Nile. We know the story continues, the famous story of Moshe is put into a basket, watched by the watchful eye of his sister Miriam, put in the river in the Nile. And while he's in the Nile, the daughter of Pharaoh is bathing and is able to grab this basket, and she draws out the baby. And in the words used are min hamayim mishisihu, from the waters he was drawn out, and thus inspired to name min hamayim mishisihu Moshe. She's inspired by this account of drawing the baby out of the water and calls him Moses. And his name from then on is Moses. So the question is, if his name was Moses after he's drawn out of the water, what was his given name at birth? What was his name? What was the name he was born with? After all, he lived in the house for 3 months with his mother. She had this amazing experience where she had this baby and they didn't take him from her. So what did she call this boy? So it says that when he was born, the Torah says that the mother saw and he was good. And she said, Tov Hashem, good is God. She understood the moment was a special moment. And when she said, Tov Hashem, things are good, Rashi points out, the great French commentator points out, one of the greatest commentators of all says, and you know what Moshe's original name was? Tuvia, Tov Hashem. That's right. The great Moses' original name was Tuvia the milkman. Tovia. Could you imagine if Moshe's legacy was that his name was Tevye? I think it's an amazing moment right there. But the big question here is, he has such an incredible origin. Moshe is born in such an exciting moment that, after all, his mom recognizes that moment, is inspired by the greatness of the moment to name him after that moment, and yet we never use that name at all. In fact, most people wouldn't know that Tevye the milkman is inspired by Moses' original name of Tuvia as brought down in tradition. So why don't we call Moses Tuvia, a Hebrew name, versus the above mentioned Moshe, which was based on the Egyptian princess given name by drawing him out of the water? I always thought this was an important question, because if we could answer that question, we can answer a core idea of what Moshe really was all about. Moshe obviously was a great leader. In a way, he was our first great king and our great ruler, as he both led us and ruled us and brought incredible bouts of clarity to what the mission of the Jewish person is that we live with till this very day. So this message of why Moshe is called Moshe versus by his original moment and inspirational moment name of Tuvia brings us back to our original conversation, and it goes like this. Being a good guy, being a good person, Tov Hashem, even being a good godly person is just not going to cut it when it comes to changing the world. It's just not going to cut it. If Moshe was Tov Hashem, was Tuvia, was a good dude, that would be sweet. But we wouldn't know of him till today. We wouldn't know of the Jewish people technically based on that narrative. The narrative that made the difference was that the defining character of Moshe was to be somebody who was drawn out of water, and the rest of his life spent his time drawing people out of their challenges and into a higher space. Moshe was not a good dude. Moshe was somebody who schlepped people out, who took people from one space to the next, elevated them, took them out from where they were drowning, and brought them to a place where they could thrive. And that is the biggest difference between being a good person and being you. If all Judaism wanted was for you to be a good person, then it's true. Why be Jewish if it's all about being a good person? In today's day and age, it's not so fungible being good. We understand what leading a good life is. Recycling, and in Northern California very much, if not all over the country, I don't know yet, I'm in my bubble after all. Composting, and very much being a carbon footprint conscious individual. These things are all wonderful and good. But it's just not enough to be a good person anymore. A person needs to be somebody who helps others get out of their challenging moments and brings them to a higher space and brings them to a greater platform, a greater level. You have to be somebody who helps other people grow. And this is why it's an appropriate message here at my grandfather's house in Springfield. Because, like I said earlier, I really think my grandfather was the type of guy who would have been a good guy no matter what he did. He was a good guy. But what makes him special is not that he was a good guy, was that he spent every day for 70 straight years. I mean, that's, give or take, we're talking about a lifetime of being committed to making sure other people were growing and other people were getting from level to level, and making sure that the life that he lived wasn't one of being a good person, but was emulating the original Jewish leadership ideals of Min HaMayim Mishisiyu, to draw others out from drowning from their challenges and bring them up to a higher level. And when that happens, you don't just end up being a good person, you end up being somebody whose life is full. Moshe Rabbeinu didn't just live a good life, he created a platform for infinity amounts of people to live a good life. So we could think about our own personal lives in our own limited moment that we live, what the narrative we think is. We could live in it within our personal narrative of being a good person. But that's not what living is all about. It's not about living in your own moment. Living in the moment only means asking myself, am I just a good person, or am I looking for the opportunity to help other people's grow to a higher level? And that's why the title is, being a good person is just not good enough today. And the truth is, from Jewish point of view, it was never good enough just to be a good person. You always have to be somebody who drew somebody else out. In fact, to use Isaiah's words, being a good person may just be a superficial idea in the first place. Helping others, that's where life is really understood. So, I look forward to being back with you live in the Bay Area next week. But until then, thank you all for tuning in. Have a good evening. This coming Friday night, we have our monthly Zehut Shabbat dinner. I look forward to seeing you all there. And feel free to send me any questions or comments anytime. All the best.